Hey everybody, it's Brian Burns and welcome to this episode of the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite topics in sales is questions. And anybody who is already enrolled in the courses knows that you get in the month of January my free course on questions that sell. It's a $500 value that is included. Just check out the office hours for the coupon. And you get 2 30-minute one-on-ones with me to go over your questions and to build curiosity into commitment. Questions is the only mind control capability that we have as human beings, and they are insanely powerful. And as one member said, we're professional question askers, and that's what we are. So if you're not good at it, you're going to miss out. And the other thing is the likelihood that you're going to come up with the best questions in game, in front of the customer, on the phone with them, is little to none. So we have to work on them, and we have to get out of our head and into their head. And that's what I teach in that course. Also, the prices are going up February 1st. So if you want in, get in now onto the courses. And if you want to talk them over, get on my calendar. We'll talk it over. But be serious. This is not just content. It's not just knowledge. It's somebody you can talk to, me, and the community. So you can make friends in the community if you want. You can join office hours if you want. And you can show your work and get feedback. That's the beauty of this. And it's working out insanely well, as you can hear on the outro, for the people who are making this investment. And this is totally different than what your company trains you on. People aren't specific to what you're selling, or somebody who hasn't sold in 20 years. This is my passion. This is what I've done longer than most of the population's been alive. And I just enjoy it so much. So make sure you're checking out at b2brevenue.com. Even if you don't have any money or you don't want to invest in yourself, you can get my free ebook there. You just sign up, and I don't spam. I haven't sent out a single email yet other than the confirmation and the book itself. I kind of like an opt-in audience. That's my thing. I kind of like people who proactively listen to the podcast, check out my stuff on LinkedIn, and just want to become part of this, want to become better. That's kind of like me. I just want to become better. So we're going to talk about questions today, and I'll sum it up at the end. But it is something that you have to work on, and you have to get feedback from somebody else, somebody who's a lot like your customer, somebody who can put themselves in that position, in that place. And one other thing, sales questions. I've got a whole podcast on answering sales questions. Are you subscribed? Are you listening? All your favorite questions are there, and you get to hear my little riff on what I think a great answer to them is. Just one guy's opinion. One sales rep. I don't know it all, but I know a little, maybe, sometimes. Also, you're checking me out on LinkedIn. I'm putting out videos every day. Oh, I just walk around and I just can't stop talking about sales. Somebody's got to stop me. The neighbors are looking. You got to look too. They're under 2 minutes. Little sales nibbles to hopefully make you more money this year. That's my mission. That's my purpose in life. Let's get into the interview, and make sure you're checking out my buddies over in Indianapolis. Co-Video is just crushing it. Jason Price, the founder there, I just can't keep up with them. They've got a Chrome plugin now, and video email is one of your superpowers this year. If you're not doing it, you're behind the times. What you'll find is you connect with people. Why is Instagram so powerful? It's images and video. Everybody's going to video. If your emails are just text, it looks like everyone else's text. And nobody engages because you get too much. So covideo.com, make sure you're checking out that. Make sure you told them you heard about it on The Brutal Truth. Let's get into the interview. I'll sum it up at the end, and a big thank you for everyone who supported the show. And tell somebody about The Brutal Truth, Sales Questions, and B2B Revenue Leadership Podcasts. Well, I mean, how did you first become a Brit with a name like Antonio and then land in Miami?
So that's a good question. So my, Antonio Garrido, it's a good Yorkshire name, right? Well, so my father, I was going to say my father was Spanish, but he still is. So my father is Spanish. My mother, Greek from Athens. I lived my whole life, well, until the last 5 years, in the UK. Lived in Spain as well, obviously, in the early days. And so I've been in Miami for about 5 years, from Spanish and Greek descent, I guess is the short answer.
And how about sales? How did you get interested in sales?
I took my, I don't want to bore any of your listeners. I took my second degree in marketing. And I think if you sort of find yourself in the marketing world, you find yourself by default in the sales world as well. And I came up to kind of senior management through the marketing route. Some people go through finance, some people go through sales. I kind of went through marketing. I ran 4 pretty large companies. I guess you'd call them Fortune 60 companies, and went on throughout my kind of 30 years doing that. Just a million training courses. Eventually, one day, I was trained by an organization called Sandler Training, which some of your listeners may be familiar with, and kind of, I don't want to sound like Victor Kayam, if you know who that is, but kind of liked it so much that, bought a company. So that's
You're dating yourself with that reference.
I am rather, aren't I? There's like 4,000 people now furrowing their brow thinking, who's Victor Kayam? Well, anyway, Google it. It's an interesting tale.
Cool. And you have a real kind of interest in questions. Is that your thing in sales?
It is. I wrote a book specifically about asking questions because people are so poor at it. It's interesting. I was looking through your podcast, and you have, close to 300 podcasts now, right? So congratulations on that. And I was zooming through them, and I was wondering, what sort of percentage do you think the podcast is all centered around questioning? I'm going to guess about half. Do you think that's fair?
It is the thing that I focus on a lot.
Yeah.
Mostly because of my style.
Sure.
And it's really the only mind control we really have.
Nice. Okay, I like it. Gosh, I may steal that. It's probably going to be mine by the end of the day.
Uh-oh.
So you're right. I mean, questioning is so super critical to the success of not only kind of people in customer services and sales management and leadership, but to everybody. But for lots of reasons, and I can certainly describe them. They're all talked about in the book. But this half an hour interview would end up about 2 hours long, but for lots of reasons, humans are not very good at asking questions. We're really good at answering them, and that's because of biology and kind of genetics that's stamped on our DNA and socialization and so on. So we're really good at answering questions. We're really poor at asking questions, and we're really good at asking dumb questions. We're not very good at asking smart questions. Does that make sense? So we're good at asking some kind of trite questions. But in my experience, and I've been running sales teams, large sales teams and small sales teams, and then training them for more years than I care to remember. Asking really smart questions is the secret to everything. That's my firm belief, and probably yours too, I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was kind of out of necessity because I wasn't the gadfly. I wasn't the person who could hold an audience for an hour.
Right.
And the only thing I could talk about was the technology, which, people had a little bit of curiosity about.
Right.
But what I found was if you had 2 to 3, maybe 5 great questions, you didn't have to talk.
Right. That's good. I quite, kind of those kind of sales managers and salespeople and customer service gang that are listening to this, if you kind of try and keep in mind sort of a 70-30 rule, which means that they're speaking for at least 70% of the time, which means that you're speaking for 30% of the time, which means the information flow is coming towards you, not away from you. Well, the way that you get, I mean, it's fairly obvious when you think about it, the way that you get them talking is by asking them questions. So just as you say, if you have a number of really smart questions, and I can give you some examples of those a little bit later on, or certainly my interpretation of them, even to the extent that they think to themselves, cracky, I don't even know the answer to that question. If you can get them to say that 3 or 4 times, during a meeting, then largely you've cracked it. I'll go into that a little bit more later on if you want to know a little bit more.
Yeah, but let's go through maybe like the sequence, because I think too many people just come up with, like the what keeps you up at night, kind of the overused questions.
Sure.
But you got to build up to something like that. You don't open with that.
Well, you can, you can. So if Can I just spend 2 minutes talking about what the problem is, and then once we've understood the problem, it'll help us understand the solution. Would that be okay?
That'd be great.
So the problem is, and I know that this is a huge oversimplification, but hopefully some of the people that are listening to this are going to, really kind of recognize what I'm talking about, and it'll really resonate with them. But let's just, in a very broad brush terms, think about what the challenges that sales professionals have with buyers, right? So what's the issue? Well, first of all, typically there's an issue with time. And the issue with time is that, if I were to ask 100 buyers, because who are all busy people, they've all got lots of things to do, lots of people to see. If I asked them, and if I said to them, hey, if you had a Harry Potter magic wand, right, and you had to spend some time with a salesperson, how much time would you like to give them? If it were in your gift. And typically they're going to say, a little. Okay, so let's just say
little to none.
Yeah, right. So let's just be generous and say 20 minutes, for example. But if I were to ask 100 of those sales professionals that call on those buyers, if you had a Harry Potter magic wand, how much time would you like to spend with the with the buyer? And let's imagine they say 60 minutes. So there's a slight disconnect in terms of time. Now, there's also a disconnect in terms of kind of airtime or like talking. The buyer typically wants the seller to say, to do all of the talking. Okay, so what have you got for me? What's new? Tell me, tell me what's going on. Answer this question. Give me this stuff. Give me this info. Give me this detail. We kind of call that, unpaid consultancy, right? So the buyer wants the sales professional to be an unpaid consultant and do all of the talking. But the sales professional largely wants the buyer to do all of the talking, like what's going on? What have you tried? What's the problem? Have you given up? Okay, so airtime is an issue. And then in terms of strategy, there's also an issue because the buyer really wants he wants it to be more like an interrogation, right? It kind of like, I don't know if anyone's ever been arrested by the feds, but when you get arrested by the feds, they're pretty good at getting to the truth, right? Yeah. They're pretty good at asking questions, and the buyer typically wants to interrogate, let's say, this. Now, I do recognize that, this is a generalization, but the buyer wants to kind of have an interrogation. In other words, they're in charge of the interaction, and they're the ones that are kind of, asking all of the questions. But the seller, he doesn't want an interrogate. He doesn't want to interrogate the buyer, but he wants more of an interview than interrogation, right? Rather kind of helping them with their inquiries as opposed to being interviewed by them, right? Interrogated by them. So the buyer is typically slightly more aggressive style, and the seller, is therefore naturally more defensive. So we don't have equal business stature. That's another problem. The buyer, two more to mention, the buyer kind of, they typically want to treat the sales professional or the organization just as another vendor, right? Just one of many, whereas the seller wants to be thought of as a trusted advisor. So we have a vendor trusted advisor disconnect, and then ultimately, typically what the buyer wants to do, kind of his outcome, if you like, his preferred outcome, is something that sounds like, oh, that's really interesting. Let me think it over, and I'll get back to you next Thursday, right? And then what happens when the seller calls the buyer next Thursday? Kind of typical crickets, and then sends a jolly email and text, and before you know it, he's kind of in the witness protection program. And so the outcome is that, you know, the seller wants a decision, the buyer wants to think it over. So we have a lot of disconnect. At Sandler, we call that mutual mystification. Kind of the buyer wants one thing, seller wants something else. And in my experience, and you know, obviously the people that buy the book, questions and the right questions answer all of those things. So we have to figure out the right kind of questions that address those issues. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Okay. So here's the other thing. So this is the last thing, and then we'll go on to like what's a good question, what's not such a good question. We typically think, and again, this is from socialization, from schools, and all of that kind of good stuff, that we kind of get some scripting, you know, humans when we're 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, and we kind of it's programmed into us that we demonstrate how smart we are by how well we answer questions, right? So when we came home with a report card full of A's, and our mum kind of patted us on the top of the head and said, well done you, and we had a raising kind of ego or raising status, you know, by being associated with knowing stuff, right? We kind of learned the scripting that we get rewarded for answering questions in a kind of full and, you know, complete way. But actually that works massively against most all sales professionals and most sales situations, because if somebody said to me, for example, or said to you, Brian, if somebody said to me, you know, how many offices do you have around the world, right? I am tempted, because that's a fairly easy question, right? I know the number of offices that we have around the world, and I'm so tempted to give that answer because, you know, and feel the kind of psychic hug that I get from having given a good answer. Problem is, what we don't know is the motivation behind that question. Because somebody could be asking that question, right? And it's a real simple question. How many offices have you got, right? So it's a simple question, and I want to give the answer to it. But if I don't understand the motivation behind it, whereas one, you know, prospect could ask me that question, and he could be thinking to himself, well, the reason I ask is because I just want, you know, very local kind of entry-level costings, right? That's what he could be thinking. Or somebody else could be thinking, because I got a guy in New York and I got another guy in California that needs training. Or he could be thinking, a million things. He could be thinking, I want to be a big fish in a small pond, or I want to be a small pond and, you know, a small fish in a big pond. So if I say, oh, we have 300 offices, you know, and I get asked that question 100 times and just answer it, and we have 300 offices around the world, or 278. It's likely that 99.9% of the time, that's the wrong answer. So the right answer is, that's a really interesting question. Of all the questions you could ask me right now, why is that one important? And then I find out what the motivation is behind his question. I can then answer that question in a much more full and thorough and helpful way. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, because the number doesn't really answer the real question.
No.
And they may not even, you know, feel the right reason for why they're asking that.
Of course, and they could be asking that question just as a filler.
Right, yeah, just to keep the chat going. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other thing, if you think about it, Brian, that, you know, let's imagine that you had a meeting with a prospect, and let's just imagine it's 60 minutes, okay? And so by the time you've done the hellos and goodbyes, you're down to maybe 50 minutes after you've talked about the weather and the price of fish and what's next, right? So by the time you've done all that, you've maybe got 50 minutes in an hour conversation. Well, in an hour's conversation, how many questions do you think, you know, and I'm not asking you for like, what do you think is the target number? I'm not asking that, but in an hour, how many questions do you think you could reasonably ask and get answered? What do you reckon is a good number in an hour?
I don't think there would be many. I think, you know, 3 to 5 in my mind.
Right.
If you do it right.
Sure. So it's certainly not 100, right?
No,
so it's certainly a small
100.
number, right? Well, if that's the case, right, then I think, or it's my belief, and, you know, talked about in the book, that then if you have an opportunity to ask, you know, 5, 6, 7 questions, well, then they really need to be really good questions, right? Because because you have limited kind of face-to-face interaction with the prospect. And so every question needs to, be asked with real intent, right? So if I went to see a prospect, for example, and I asked them, we sat down, and I'm doing speech marks in the air when I say this, I wasted one of my questions by asking something like, how tell me a little bit about the company, or how long have you been the buyer here, or how many people work at ABC Corp, or basically any kind of answer that could have been gotten from, a LinkedIn search, a website, a literature, any of that stuff that I'm wasting my time with. But that's kind of not. That's not what I call professional salesmanship, right? That's just kind of like, they're really dumb questions. But I come to, you demonstrate how smart you are, not by the questions you answer, but by the questions you ask. In other words, by the information you gather, not by the information you give. But so many salespeople, they just kind of show up and throw up, right? They just kind of sit down and they just talk, talk like crazy, like I've been doing for the last 20 minutes. Go ahead.
But you brought that up, that mismatch, because the customer wants to view all of us like a commodity.
Sure.
Because that's how they have power.
Yeah.
And they are not recognizing the real pain and problem and implications of that because they don't want to, unless they have to.
Yeah, oftentimes the buyer will, I don't want to say play a game, because that sounds like it's too, contrived, but they'll often avoid speaking about the real issue, because they know that the real issue, whatever that is likely to expose them to, as you say, maybe pain, maybe cost. We all know. I'd encourage the people that are listening today just to think about this as another kind of question. What percentage, and maybe you can answer it, Brian, what percentage of the time that a sales professional is with a buyer, what percentage of that time do you think you're getting the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Well,
what percent?
I'd say less than 20.
Right.
And I don't think it's because either side is misrepresenting. I think it's more that they don't want to feel the real pain. Right.
So therefore, it's our job as sales professionals, I would argue. What's our job? If you could distill our job, you keep distilling it down. I'm going to argue that it's a sales professional's job is to get to the truth, right? That's their job. Because the buyer isn't going to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And they're going to tell you a version of the truth that they think it's in their best interest to have you believe. Does that make sense?
It does.
So our job then, therefore, is to get to that 15, 20, 30% that they don't want to tell us. Or rather, to put it another way around, to get to that 30% that they haven't told any of your competitors. Okay, so your job then is to get to the truth that that they don't necessarily naturally want to volunteer. Well, how do you do that then? Well, you do it by really smart questioning, because otherwise, what do? You just go and kind of light a candle and say a prayer and hope that the psychic interference kind of clears and you can read the guy's mind. Well, that's not a good strategy in my view. So have things like a really clear pre-call plan, right? If you don't have a pre-call plan, you're crazy, right? So, any pilot has a you wouldn't want a pilot to sit in the front of the plane and just go, okay, where are we?
Playing solitaire. Yeah.
Right, yeah, exactly. And wondering, do we have fuel? Do we have
We'll figure it out.
yeah. Let's. I've been flying planes for a while now. Let's hope for the best, right? or a surgeon, or right. So, or an accountant, kind of not necessarily listening to all of the tax laws, just the ones he likes, right?
Just the ones that are easy.
Yeah. So we imagine. All right, we demand of certain professionals a very professional approach, and yet I'm not saying you or me or anyone I know or anyone you know, Brian, but there are so many sales professionals that just think, well, I've been doing this for 30 years. Let's just go in and, I know how to do this stuff. And come on, if you want the buyer to treat you like a professional, at least act like one, right? So have a pre-call plan. Any kind of, if you think about any kind of military, just think about the Top Gun, right? We've all seen the movie Top Gun, I guess. Am I aging myself again?
Well,
but
I used like the Billy Joel analogy. Do you think he doesn't practice before he goes out in front of Madison Square Garden?
Right.
He knows how to play the piano. He needs to warm up.
That's perfect. But so not only does he need to warm up, right? But I'm going to also argue that, you look at any kind of military campaign or action or surgeons, again, pilot, all of these people, not only do they have a pre-call plan, they then execute that plan, and then they review that plan and say, how could we have done that better, right? So some you win, some you learn, but you have to constantly try and get better, raise the bar. And so if I could give you your listeners, maybe a few questioning tips and techniques to maybe help them out, would that be useful?
That'd be fantastic. So
we did a ton of research when we put this book together, and here's what we discovered: that most sales professionals, right? They typically go out into the world selling the same sort of, promoting the same products and services to similar people, right? We're not all Amazon. We sell everything from apples to zebras, right? So we typically sell our products and services to the same kinds of people, largely, broadly. We'll have maybe 5 or 6 different customer types, right? But largely, we're having very similar conversations often. And what we find out when you actually track these things is that most sales professionals get the same 20 or 30 questions asked of them, just in a slightly different pair of pants, right? So I would ask everybody to make a record of the questions that you get asked over the next couple of weeks, right? They will largely be the same 20 or 30 questions, okay? Now, I don't mean dumb questions like, did you find your way here okay today? Would you like a coffee? Right? I don't mean that stuff. I mean specifically about their products and services. So I think track the questions you're getting asked. And then at Sandler, we have a process which we call reversing, which is answer every question with a question. In other words, try and get to the truth. So the questions that you get asked all of the time, I think it's incumbent upon the sales professional to figure out, to spend time, right? Sit down, think hard, because we all know when we look in the rearview mirror, when we come out of the meeting, when somebody asks us a question, why is it an hour later when we're driving down the road that we think to ourselves, I should have said this and I could have said that and I wish I would have said this, right? We've all done that a million times, right? So be very mindful about not only the questions that you ask, which I'll come to in a minute, but also the questions you get asked, right? And then your responses to those questions. Another good thing that I just like people to think about when they're going through their world, their professional life, is there's something called the universal yes. Okay, and the universal yes is an incredibly powerful technique that basically gets you permission to say whatever it is that you want to say. So should I give you an example of that?
Yeah, please.
That was an example of that, right? so when you say to people, for example, if a buyer says to me or a prospect says to me, I think what we're going to do is we're going to split this into 2 and we'll just do half now and maybe half next year, right? For example, just as a dumb example. What I want to say is, no, I don't know that that's a good idea, right? That's what I want to say. But as soon as I say anything like that, then I'm disagreeing with the chap, and now we're into kind of conflict. And now it's got to be a bit of kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. It's got to be a bit of confirmation bias. His ears have heard his mouth say it, so now he has to justify it. And you get yourself in very entrenched positions, right? So instead of saying, I don't know that that's a good idea, it's much smarter to use a universal yes technique, which would be something like, hey, Frank, I hear you, right? So, I hear what you're saying, right? So that's important because people like to feel understood and, validated and listened to. But then you say something like, with a bit of a sigh and a bit of a huff and a puff and say, can I tell you my biggest fear? Right? And when you say to somebody, can I tell you my biggest fear? Or can I give you an example? Or you got 30 seconds for a quick story? Or any of these kind of, all in the book, any of those kind of things, it gives you permission to then, the answer is always yes, just as you gave me. It's a universal yes, and then you get permission to continue. Make sense? You're going to say yes.
Of course, I'm going to say it.
Okay, good.
But give us an example of how do we get to the real truth, real driver.
Yeah, by asking real smart questions. So we talked earlier about what's a bad question. Well, so let me give you some examples of some good questions. And remember, have these planned in advance up front, consistent with whatever it is your goals and objectives for that particular call are. So in other words, you don't have the same, 10 questions that you have at any time and you use at every single occasion. What you have are about 20 questions, 20 really good strategic questions, and maybe 20 really good tactical questions, because there's a difference between the two. And we need to mix up that sometimes we're going to be asking a strategic question, which is a little bit more of a thoughtful, considered response, and rather than a tactical response, right? So we've got some good strategic questions and tactical questions written in advance, pre-prepared, because that's another thing that the FBI talk about is kind of the truth lies in the microseconds. Whilst you ask a question, if you ask a question and they're answering it and you're thinking of your next question, you're doomed, right? So you need to have all of these questions in advance. So if I asked a prospect of mine something like, hey, Frank, could you spend a couple of minutes telling me about what are the dynamics you're seeing in the marketplace right now that might have the most, detrimental impact on your strategic positioning over the next 3 or 4 years? That's a good question, because that's going to make him think and go, oh, crikey, that's a good question. I'm not sure. And you demonstrate kind of more trusted advisor status rather than vendor status when you ask that question. Now, not everybody, if you're selling paper clips, that's not maybe a kind of question that you're going to ask. But, asking someone how they see their commercial strengths eroding over the next couple of years is a strategic question. And depending on the level of the buyer, right, if you're at the C-suite level, that's a really good question. Yeah. That's a much better question than the question you asked earlier, which is like, what keeps you awake at night or something. I can't quite remember what it was, right?
That's kind of the cliche questions, I guess, that are overused.
Exactly. Right, exactly. Or you might say, hey, Frank, take a couple of minutes to what are the top things that you need to execute what are the top things that you need to do very well in order to execute your business strategy over the next 3 or 4 years? If you're at that strategic level, right? But you could be asking him, if he's a buyer, you could be asking him questions about how it is that he is going to be incentivized or measured, or what his boss recognizes as, a success for this kind. How, if you understand his position, and maybe it's in relative to his company, what his objectives are or whatever, it's much better than how long you've been working at the company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, get beyond the situational, get into the kind of problem, but the real kinesthetic elements of the problem, because people don't like to surface them, because they want to look at a product as a thing, and the thing does stuff.
Sure.
And they want that stuff, but they want the stuff from, whoever. They don't care who they get the stuff from. Well,
so here's the thing. So there's a few things about that. So first of all, if we don't make the conversation, and I'm doing speech marks in the air, emotional, then the conversation is rational, right? And if the conversation is always logical and rational and so on, then the only way to differentiate you from your competitors largely is price. Okay, so and we don't want price to be the differentiator. We want a different differentiator, and that means we have to have more of an emotional connection, right? And so one of the things that we train quite heavily is different is better than better, right? Because if we sound and look and feel and smell and taste like all of our competitors, then how are we going to be treated? Like all of our competitors, yes. Right? So one of the ways that we differentiate ourselves quite significantly is by the intelligence of the questions that we ask. Now, here's the trick that I don't want people to go away not recognizing this kind of little piece of magic. People often ask me, what's the most important question of all the questions you can ask? Right? It's a pretty good question, right? Of all the questions I can ask, what's the key, the number one most important question? And people may be listening and thinking, well, there is no such thing. Well, actually there is, right? There is a question that's the single most important question of all other questions. And it's this. I'm going to ask you a universal yes. Would you like me to share it? Yeah. So you have to get permission to ask all of these questions, right? Because if you don't get permission to ask a bunch of questions, then it's going to feel like an interrogation from the other side, right? So just as you said, some people are kinesthetic, but most people are visual. So a good way to get permission to ask questions, and there's lots of research behind this, and you might want to look up the Harvard photocopy study and all of those kind of things, right? And all that confirmation bias stuff. But so it's a reasonable question to say, hey, Frank, in order for me to be able to see the world through your eyes, right? That's a nice visual expression, right? So in order for me to see the world through your eyes, so I can maybe get closer to be able to giving you the best advice I possibly can. Is it going to be okay if I ask you a whole bunch of questions? And some of them might be quite tricky. It might be a little bit challenging, but will that be okay? That's a universal yes, because no one's ever going to say no to that. Now you've got permission to ask questions. And once you've got permission to ask questions, you feel much more relaxed about asking them. Because here's the other problem. Whilst we've been programmed biologically and sociologically, right, to answer questions, we also feel uncomfortable asking them. Well, we're okay once we've got permission. So my first, here's the key takeaway I'd like everybody to take from this conversation. Get permission to ask questions. And once you've got permission to ask questions, ask really good questions. And don't answer quite so many questions until you know what their motivation is behind them asking you a question. Did that all make sense as well?
It does.
All right, good.
So okay. I really appreciate your time today. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that. I love talking about questions because when you form a set of great questions, you get the focus on the prospect, on what they care about, on their life and their world. And too often we slip into who we are and what we do, and that has its place. But until somebody's curious, until they're interested, until they're excited about what you can do for them and the problem that you can solve, they don't care. So please check out b2brevenue.com. And I'll give you some frequently asked questions just so maybe save that call. Most people ask, what courses are there and what's the differences? There's two major ones. Start the conversation, get the meeting. It's all about getting those new cold outreach appointments set. It's not about how do you qualify inbound. It's all about going out to your total addressable market, prioritizing, segmenting it, and then starting those key conversations that's going to blow your number out. The stuff that comes in, we're pretty good at keeping that going and helping people. We're trained to do that. But nobody really teaches us that cold outreach. And this is not the same stuff that all the failed SDRs and failed sales reps are teaching out there from the 90s. It's not just about personalization and making it specific to them. There's parts of that, but that's not the focus. It's more on the psychology of people and how they become aware of strangers and how they become curious. It is a systematic way that I've developed over 30 years and really have codified, put it into a simple process that I teach people making $5 an hour in Bangladesh how to do, who don't even know how to speak English. I teach them exactly how to do this, and a simple way, and then I can automate it. So my week is just packed full of new interviews, talking with clients, and it's organic and natural. It's not pressure. It's not pitchy. And that's the beauty of this. It's a nice systematic way. So on all the courses, you get 1 year access. You can pay all at once or per month. It's not a membership where you just go for 1 month and cancel. You can't do that. It's a full year commitment or full year access. You can do the course in a month, or you could spread it out over the year, but you get help. You get a community with office hours, which is a hour-long meeting every other week that gets recorded and put into the course. So it's an artifact of the process. So you get to see people grow and try different things and see what works. And the other course is closing the complex sale. Now, once you get that meeting, you get that first conversation started. They don't, slap a PO in your hand. You have to really get the technical sale, the business justification. You have to understand how companies buy politically, administratively, and economically. And that is something that took a long time for me to learn, and nobody else teaches this. People teach about insights and storytelling and questions. I do some of that too. But nobody teaches how companies make changes and how you can control it and how you can add direction, momentum, and control to your deal. And I hear people, oh, you can't control it. Well, somebody's going to win. Somebody's controlling it. And is it 100% control? No, but it is some control. And somebody's going to win that business. The losers say, I did everything I can. The winners understand how to make it happen. So both courses, the price is going up February 1st to 2019. So make sure you check it out. We can talk it over on the phone. They both have office hours, and they both have unlimited one-on-ones. So what's a one-on-one? It's a half-hour conversation with me. It's included with the course, so it's free as long as I can record it and put it into the course so that everyone can benefit from the kind of coaching discussion scene. A lot of people during office hours don't have a particular question, or they just want to kind of listen in. So I build in lessons, Q&A, additional topics. And if you get closing the complex sale, I'm throwing in not only the questions course, which is you get with Start the Conversation as well. So that's a $500 value. This January, if you order Closing the Complex Sale, I'm throwing in a year to excellence. So Selling with Questions is the first increment. I'm going to have modules on the exact process that I've seen the best salespeople go through. I'm stealing it. I'm taking it, and I'm going to teach you and condense it into something that if you're willing to invest half hour or an hour a week and do little minute habits daily, less than 3 minutes a day on 3 different habits daily over a year, I will show you exactly how to stay focused, motivated, excited, and successful at sales. It's going to include everything that I've learned over the years condensed into a year-long course. So it's going to be content. This year it's going to be part of Closing the Complex Sale, so you get community there. I may do some one-on-ones with it. Probably will. I love the one-on-ones. I'd do them all day if I could. But I got to do podcasts. I got to do LinkedIn. I got to go walk and talk. I'm busy over here, I'm using Pipedrive. Did I tell you how good Pipedrive is becoming? It's becoming like an enterprise CRM. So, if you're a sales manager or you're going into a company and they haven't, crammed you into a CRM that you can't stand, which most do, get Pipedrive. They're even helping you transfer your data from the legacy CRMs, you know what I'm talking about, into Pipedrive, modern, easy to use, highly integrated CRM that's so simple and visual And have you seen their mobile app? Come on, the thing rocks, especially if you're out on the road. I try and stay off the road, except for when I'm walking and talking. I try to work out, try to get some exercise. But if you're out there, you're visiting people, you got to have your data with you and an easy to find. You got to keep track of everything. And Pipedrive's mobile app, you get 1 month free with the Brutal Truth coupon code. How's that? All one word. Brutal Truth. I don't know if it's one word, but it should be. At least the coupon is. That's it. I appreciate you listening. Make sure you're checking out the courses. Make sure you're connecting up or following me on LinkedIn. Hey, the YouTube channel is live and well. You want to see how handsome I am? How well I'm aging? Check it out. God damn. It's scary watching the time go by. That's it. Brian Burns podcast on YouTube. Check that out if you like little 1-minute videos on what's working today in sales and selling. God, I love this profession. We'll see you next time. Network to get expand and meet new people that could help him with his business, people that help get the word out. And these little efforts, these little things tend to mount up. And we tend to only focus on what is going to close right now. And we should. And when we have other time, we should be focused on what can close sooner or later. And sales is a priority thing. And it may sound contradictory because I'm always talking about, prioritize in the order of closure. And I agree with that 100%. But then we have the rest of the day. And the rest of the day, we tend to just go out and try and find totally cold things, as opposed to things that we had touched 3 months ago, 6 months ago, because timing in sales is so critical. The people who are in market and active, they come to us. The people that is the real market are people that should talk to us, but the timing just isn't right. They don't know what we do yet. They're not even curious. Their level of interest hasn't peaked yet. That's our job. And we can't do it directly. If we do it directly, that's a take. That's not a give. And a give, we have to become creative at because we're not used to that. So I listened to this episode a couple of times because it really is gold. If you really want to get good at this, start the conversation, get the meeting is for you. It takes your whole addressable market, prioritizes it, and I show you a systematic way of doing this that isn't time-consuming, isn't cold calling, isn't cold emailing. It's organic, it's natural, and it really is a process to what Gary is talking about. It takes the thinking out of it because it's a lot of work if you do it, one-off every time. But if you have a systematic way of doing it, it's really powerful. If your challenge is you're getting in and talking to people, but the deals are stalling, there's no decision, it's stuck, you're not really sure where it is or where it has to go, and you just need help. Closing the complex sale is for you. And it's just great for anybody who wants to take their game to the next level. And if you're the B player that thinks, I know everything, I've done everything, it's the market, that's the problem, it's my territory. Well, that's not the course for you. I don't know I think therapy is the course for you. But if you really want to take your game to the next level, including me, and that's why I came up with the Year of Excellence. What I wanted to do was let me document the very best I've seen. Let me do the research, curate it, condense it into something that reps can take and not have to, read 4 books on this, 5 books on that. The problem with that is, you get a lot of knowledge, but you don't take any action and you forget it and you move forward and you get stuck in the rut. How do you come up with a systematic way within a year, whether you start in January or you start in November? It doesn't matter. You just get into it and get momentum and get what I call compound selling. See, my frustration as a sales rep was I didn't see enough compounding. And I always was obsessed with compound interest ever since I was a kid. And if you want to learn about it, check out Warren Buffett's documentary on HBO. It is pure gold because he was obsessed with it. And the idea is that you don't start like Groundhog Day every day. You build off of every day. You build off of your skills. You become better. You get compound interest. And over time, you get the hockey stick. Now, if you don't do this, you tend to just level off and actually sink because you get burnt out. And I've seen too many of my friends later in their career, they get burnt out and all that skill kind of goes away because their attitude and their motivation isn't there. They didn't compound. So that's kind of the theme of the Year of Excellence. It's going to be included if you sign up for Closing the Complex sale in January. You can buy it all at once, or there's a payment plan. It's not a subscription. It's not a membership. It's a year-long access to all the content from day one. So you'll get all the office hours that I did in 2018, so 25 hours of that. And you can get one-on-one, so you get a sales coach that's here for you. And if there's something that would make the course enticing for you, let me know. You can schedule a call with me at b2brevenue.com. And make sure you're checking out CoVideo. They've done some incredible work. And this year, if you're not using video email, it is a big mistake. You've got to find a way of connecting up with your audience, being organic and natural and authentic. And that's the way to do it. It's different. It's new. It's not really new, but it's new to you. It's going to be new to a lot of your customers, and it's going to be the way to really engage with your marketplace. And you're just going to miss out if you're not doing it. So check that out at covideo.com. Appreciate everybody listening. We'll see you next time.